Okay, so today is a new day and it's about 7:15 in the morning. The goal for today is going to be to put a garden topper on the new garden bed. Well, actually, first I'm gonna fill the garden bed, the bottom of it, with some hay or chicken bedding that has been composting for about a year now. So I'm gonna fill that up as about maybe a quarter to possibly halfway with the chicken bedding. And then I'm going to build the garden bed topper and put hoops on it, put the fencing around it. So today I really wanted to show how I'm building the garden bed topper, because if you're in Arizona and you have raised beds and you're dealing with a dog or some sort of animal getting into your garden bed, this is, I'm hoping, gonna be the best solution to dealing with all of that. So actually, quick change of plans. We're gonna go pick up some wood that we found that somebody's giving away for free on the Freebie app. Then we'll get to work on the garden. So this is what I have already built, and what I did is I just got these, they're 2x3s, maybe 2x2s, I don't know. But I cut them at a 45-degree angle. So I measured them out, made sure they would fit on top of my garden bed. Cut them at a 45-degree angle, screwed in some screws to just stabilize it in the corners, and then put in a corner bracket. I will tell you, the corner bracket is very important if you want it to be stable while you're opening and closing it. Without the corner brackets, it just won't be stable. It'll be really wobbly. So that's what I've done so far. The next step in the process is bending the conduit pipes. I did have, this was my old conduit pipe bending jig, but it was, my screws were too close to the edge, and so they just kept, they weren't working to hold the pipe in place while I was bending it. So I had to go get a new piece of wood. Now I have tried a couple of different jigs to do the pipe bending, and I will tell you, you have to have a pretty thick piece of plywood in order to make this work. If you try to use anything that's like a thin, I don't know what the size would be, but a thin piece of plywood is just going to crack and bend, and it's not going to actually bend the conduit pipe. So the jig that I've got set up here, first thing I did is I measured how big my garden bed, the length or width of my garden bed, not the length, the width, and I measured from well, I found the center. So the first thing is you figure out how long you want it to be, your bend, how like wide you want your conduit pipes to be. And then you find your center point, screw in I used a screw. And then you take a piece of string, you hook it onto that screw. So pretend there's a screw in there, and then you would use your string, you pull it tight, measure it to the one end that you want it to be, and draw your arc, holding tension in your line the entire time. Once you draw your arc, you just use some screws. So these are really heavy duty screws that I've got at the beginning part. So this is where I'm going to start my bend, and I put them on both sides. If it doesn't work, I'll put a piece of wood here too, just to help hold it. That's going to be the hardest, most intense point of pressure while doing the conduit bend. But you just bend it around your line of screws to the end, and then voila, you got your pipe bending. Okay. So I just bent my first piece of conduit. I've got a long side coming off the end here, which I'm going to cut off here in just a minute. I've got 2 more to go. Okay, so I got my 3 conduit pipes bent and ready to be cut to size. So I snap off those long ends of all of my conduit pipe. Now the next step is to drill a hole in the top, to the base of the top, where I want those pipes to fit down into. So for me, I use I don't remember what these are called, but it doesn't matter because you don't have to know what they're called to be able to use them. So mine, I'm using a 3/4 inch drill, spade, whatever, to make a hole. And I learned a lot with my first garden bed topper. I'm actually not going to drill all the way through with this drill bit. I'm only going to drill about maybe 3/4 of the way through. 3/4. That's not why it's a 3/4 inch. It's 3/4 inch because that's the size of the conduit outside diameter, not the inside. So the inside is 1/2 inch and the outside is like closest. It's a little bit smaller than 3/4 of an inch, but this is the best one to make the right size holes. Okay, so I used the thingamajig to drill the holes. You can see that they are not all the way through down there. There's a lot of sawdust. I'll knock that out of here in just a second. Now it's time to go get the conduit and do a dry fit. Okay, I secured the conduit into that 1/2 hole that I drilled. Remember, I only went about halfway, maybe 3/4 of the way through, and so I had to pre-drill that hole through the wood. I did not pre-drill it through the conduit. The screws that I'm using go through the conduit just fine without pre-drilling, which is good because it's kind of a pain to drill through the conduit. But make sure, if you're going to do this, I cannot stress enough that you do in fact have to pre-drill. I know I would always skip it, and I kept cracking the wood, which once it cracks, especially right up in here, it's going to weaken the integrity of the wood and make it so that it's not going to be stable for your lid. Alright, so you can see got all 3 of those hoops on. The middle hoop is a little cockeyed. That's okay. I'm building a garden bed topper, not a fancy in-home piece of furniture, so it's okay. Okay, so here's the finished garden bed topper. Well, almost finished. I'm going to put hinges on it so that I can open it up, but right now it's just sitting on here. Definitely looks better than version 1, this is version 2.0, and learned a lot from first version. The number one thing I learned is that my hoops were way too long, so you can see those are super tall. I'm probably going to take them off and chop them down at some point. The smaller hoop definitely looks better, works better, and the lid is smaller, so it can do a better job opening and closing.